Courtney Johnson, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me here today.
Well, I am so excited to have you, and I know our listeners are going to be really excited to listen to you and hear about your journey. So I think a good place to start would be where you are today. So tell me a little bit about yourself. What is Age of Learning, and more importantly, what do you do at Age of Learning?
So I'm an account executive. I use a lot of my expertise in special education and my background as being a parent, someone in the community, to promote educational products that close literacy, numeracy, and caregiver engagement deficits that a lot of our communities have. And that requires a lot of relationship building, community outreach, engagement, working with schools and communities. And the core of who I am is like empowerment, value, yielding, and, so being able to work with an organization that believes in what I believe in is pretty cool.
That is awesome. And I mean, I was fortunate enough to stumble upon your profile on LinkedIn, and I learned a lot about you just from the outside looking in. And it sounds like you really have like a very sort of multifaceted and three-dimensional purpose. So you're not only representing, Age of Learning and the products that that it produces, but you also have your own organization where you work with educators and folks who support educators. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I run a consulting and coaching business where we offer corporations and businesses and school entities professional development plans around special education and resources to support transition for teachers, families, community outreach programs, and service coordinators. So we cover the early intervention space, the preschool space, and the school age space.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, we do virtual components as well as in person workshops, seminars, consulting, and we really take time to work with districts and organizations to learn what their needs are. We go through needs based assessment and then explore what professional learning opportunities look like. And we try to make them really engaging and exciting. So you're not saying that could have been an email, but more so, what do I do next so that I can implement this and use these skills to change and move the needle?
So critically important and becoming more critically important. Special education is obviously, it reaches out to our most vulnerable folks who are high needs, underserved, etc. And in my own experience, I mean, it's not lost on me that it's a shame to say this. I feel displeased to say this, but the overall cost of being able to provide this important support is going up and up. And at the same time, it feels like more and more students are in need of that support. So I would imagine that the work you're doing is, super, super active and frenetic. I mean, there must not be a day that goes by where you're sitting on your hands. There must be a lot of work to do.
Absolutely, because you're talking about not just designing programs, but assessing need, right? And you're seeing a lot of different needs across the city, across the state, as far as teacher retention, student behavior, resources, being able to hire providers, shortages of providers. There's so many concerns and issues across special education. So we go in and the needs assessment will show data ranging from all different types of areas across special education that we're really honing in, specializing, I guess, giving our organizations their own individualized education plans in a sense, and working with them to meet progress goals.
Mm-hmm. And it does the work that you do also impact, and are you supporting non-special ed teachers? Because it feels like inclusion and being able to identify and support those, those diversity of needs in the regular classroom is also something that's becoming table stakes for every teacher. So is the work that you do also related to that?
Absolutely. So when we work with inclusion, we're talking about co-teaching classrooms. We'll do cohorts where teachers who partner with general education teachers and special education teachers will partner, attend trainings together, and go through a series of collaborative techniques. One on how to build a relationship, because a lot of that co-teaching model requires those two teachers to have a common understanding of what expectations look like and also of who each other are. so often we put people in the room and they're like, okay, go be co-teachers, but what foundation have you created for them to build a relationship so that the students can feel this organic excitement and love of learning in the classroom? And I think a lot of it comes down to how we train and mold our teachers to work together in order to show our students what modeling behavior looks like.
I am ashamed to say I'd never thought of that, but it is so obviously important. You want, as a child, you want to feel safe and you want to feel like you're in good hands.
Yeah.
And I would imagine, one of the key components of that is operating in an environment where the adults in the room are working cohesively as a unit, are friendly with one another, can complete each other's sentences, they can support one another. It sounds like that's such an important part of the equation. That's great to
It
hear.
really is. And if a lot of in a lot of spaces that relationship isn't fostered, and in some spaces it's almost impossible if you have two parties who just can't work together. But there are norm behaviors and norm practices that you can implement to ensure that students still feel the organicness of you two coming together as educators who love learning and want to move students forward, even if you don't have that best of friend relationship.
Hmm.
So we try to not just norm practices, but give role play opportunities so they can engage with one another, lesson planning strategies. How do you break down standards to ensure that students are getting it? And when you see certain gaps, how do you know when to pivot, right? Because there is no one size fits all approach. So being able to take time to pivot, to mold, to move things along, and try something new and take risks. These are things that people need support with.
Mm. How long have you? First, like, so when you were an educator yourself, when you worked in education, you were a SPED teacher. You were also, it looked like you were a SPED director, SPED administrator. Is that where you are trained formally? Was your degree in special education to begin with when you became a teacher?
So I did have a dual degree in special education and childhood education. However, I want to say I started this when I was a child. I used to do a lot of community meetings. My mom had a daycare, so we would do community meetings with the parents, and I would lead some of those meetings. And then I started working in contracts and editing and just understanding legal language, and that is really the root of special education: understanding the law, understanding impact, understanding what implementation looks like, and knowing what services can be provided to the people. So I want to say those two experiences that I had growing up allowed me to present and dissect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Really share information and then break it down into what it is that needs to be done legally, and then also what the people in the community are looking for,
Yeah.
because sometimes they coincide and sometimes they don't. And you want to make sure that you're supporting your community, but also adhering to compliance laws and making sure students are receiving what they need. So, my experience at the district, my educator experience is about 12 years. And in that experience, across those 12 years, I have been formally trained in special education as a teacher, as a CPSC administrator, as an assistant director of special education. And in each of those spaces, I design professional learning. So I'm coming from the teaching space, the administrative space, a parent space, because my daughter has an IEP also. So um, I bring a unique perspective that's able to meet people at all levels.
You mentioned sort of compliance, the legal requirements. The law can be interpreted in all sorts of ways, and I feel like, unfortunately, that sort of interpretation of the law is you know the what's the word I'm looking for? It can be crystallized in special education, and sometimes I feel when I'm an outside observer, and my son was on an IEP when he was younger as well. Sometimes it can feel a little bit overwhelming to parents to go in and be an advocate for their child, to be able to sort of talk legalese with the authority figures in the room. Can you talk a little bit about? I mean, it's obviously it's important, but can you talk a little bit about that sort of aspect of it in terms of, you know, being able to support your child in the way that they are entitled to, but living in an ecosystem where there are realities around support measures, costs, legal requirements, and stuff like that.
Yes. And I want to say it's like a conundrum when you have all these different perspectives because you have an idea of how the system works, but you know what your child needs at the same time. So I find myself sometimes considering the fact that I know there's a shortage across the city, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe we don't need to fight for this service, knowing there's a shortage and we won't get it. But the reality is that she needs it, right? So
Yeah.
stop caring about the shortage and make sure your kid gets what she needs, because I think that we do need to do a better effort of retention, recruitment, and engaging people in entering fields, related service provider fields like occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech language therapy. And if we do a better job of increasing awareness of these fields and having people truly work with our students, we'll be able to meet some of those deficits and those gaps that you're seeing across the country right now when it comes to shortages. And I feel like there is an overrepresentation of students in these fields where people do not see themselves to say, hey, I want to go back to school to be an occupational therapist. I want to go back to school to be a speech therapist. So I think we do need to do a better job. And with Courtney offers families and communities that opportunity. So when we do CBO collaborations, we'll have parent teacher meetings and we'll sit in front of PTAs and inform families of what opportunities and timelines look like, when they should begin to start a process at the first sign of seeing an impairment or a deficit, when they should begin collaborating with teachers to say, hi, I'm noticing these delays. My child failed these exams. They're getting after school help, and I don't see a correlation between growth. Can you help me kind of work through this? And we'll hold sessions with organizations who are supporting families to help them be aware of that process. So
Yeah.
very
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned earlier, you mentioned the city. Is that New York City?
yes. So we work with organizations across, mainly private organizations across New York City.
Yeah, I would imagine that in and of itself, being able to navigate the New York City education system is no small feat in and of itself.
Not at all. And like I was an educator and an administrator in the city. I was an administrator for the state. So having both experiences, I'm able to talk about similarities and differences between uh, the reasons the districts or certain people, when they're talking about costs, may roll programs out to maximums versus minimums and open extra classes or refuse to open extra classes, and what that looks like on our students and how the impact will affect our educators, and help leaders think through their own decision making and repercussions of what can happen if they don't open classrooms or if they do open classrooms, and how this can actually support children. So I offer thought partner services as well at the leadership level so that administrators are making informed decisions for their communities.
Wow. So this has been this has been a focus, a central focus of your life since you were a child. You've been doing this your entire life in a lot of ways. I'm so curious to understand what were some of the things that influenced you and impacted your decision. I'm sure it wasn't just a drop of the hat decision, but what were some of the things that sort of impacted you in your professional career to move from the classroom and then in administration into working in education technology, and ultimately hanging your own shingle?
So many different facets, but I'll start. I became a teacher in the community I grew up in. That is District 29 out in Queens. And I started to see a lot of news articles about reading rates and students black students particularly being overrepresented in special education, but the teachers and providers, we were either at a shortage or they didn't look like the students, right? We had a lot of non-black teachers, and to have majority black students, I felt it was a disservice to say all these children are in these programs, but we don't have providers to help them understand culturally relevant texts, make connections, to close, because some of those gaps can be closed when you have similarities in culture to break some of that nuance and bias and all those other choice words that come up when you're
Yeah.
talking about education and catering to student need. So I went in first as a community support in the world of special education, and moving to an administrator, I chose specifically preschool because I was having a daughter. So my fiance and I, we got engaged, and once we had our daughter, I sat back and I thought about all of the things that I knew on how to help her. She had a speech impediment. She wasn't able to say mama and dada until she was about 3, going on 4. And I was really frustrated. Sorry, 2 going on 3. She started reading at 3 going on 4. And I was really frustrated about her ability to take an iPad and follow along, but if I'm speaking to her, she's not responsive, right? She's
Mm-hmm,
not
mm-hmm.
not showing any sign, and I'm so confused about what's going on. So we went to an ENT. We went to a bunch of different providers. We started using the products at my now company when I was a district administrator, and just seeing her go through the motions, have the surgery, her language starts to come in. She was able to read using these programs before she was even able to have a conversation and use pragmatic language skills.
No kidding.
So her ability to grow and me support her is really what molded my decision making and becoming a preschool administrator, because I wanted to be able to support her, and then becoming a district administrator because I knew, hey, now she's in preschool, she's doing great, and I see her getting ready to move into the school age space. So let me move into the school age space. And that's when I started supervising elementary schools so that I could prepare to be an asset to her educational future. And thank God she's doing a lot better. Still needs some support in pragmatic language skills, but I'm seeing her comprehension improve, her language improve. She's able to have basic conversations, and I'm really excited about her growth. So,
They're going to make a
yeah.
movie about you. That is just so wonderful to you. How old is your daughter now?
She's at 4.5.
She's four
So,
and a half, and she's making gains.
yes, I'm very happy about her games. And sometimes I get a little thrown off because she'll read my text messages and she's like, Mommy, I didn't say that. Like if I'm talking about her in my text. And I'm like, oh, wow, you really understand what's happening. It's really exciting to be in this space now.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm on the school board in my town, so I'm used to being misquoted. I get misquoted all the time. So yeah, I can totally relate. What so wow, so this was a deeply personal experience on a couple of different levels. You
Yeah.
wanted to ensure that kids who are in need of support, who were unfortunately overrepresented, were being supported by folks that they could better relate to and contextualize. So important, right?
Yeah.
And then also, in your own family, with your daughter, you wanted to ensure that she was, able to capture the level of support that she really needed and she deserved, and you sort of threw yourself into kind of embrace that work to be able to do that. So it may not be a fair question because this sounds like it was deeply personal and gradual. But what were some of the things you discovered about yourself? Because teaching and working in administrative has its own language. It has its own sort of way of doing things, its own way of doing business. And then, of course, you're in New York, which has its own way of doing things. Now, all of a sudden, you're working for, a different company. You're in sort of the corporate environment and you're an entrepreneur. So you've created your own, organization. What were some, in having made that transition, what were some of the things that you discovered about yourself, positive and opportunities for growth? What were some of the superpowers and some of the things you were like, oh my gosh, I got to learn how to do this?
So I want to say this is probably the most simplest superpower in the world, but the power of no. That has been um, the biggest thing. Understanding what boundaries are and what they look like has been the most eye opening and refreshing experience for me, because I'm able to create and organize data, systems, programs, and go in at my own pace and understand who I am as a leader in that space and say, hey, if this is the expertise we bring, this is the value that we can support you with, but knowing when enough is enough. Like, this is what we can do, this is the overextension, and being able to come to an agreement in that space has been the most refreshing experience for me across the years. Individually, I have learned that my purpose is connected to impact. I think that that is something that um, has been exciting to be a part of, because the more impact we make and the more communities we reach, the more people who are excited about giving us reviews, sharing their experience, referring us to other clients, helping us grow in a multitude of spaces. So people are becoming more excited about partnering and growing and inviting us out to events and having us support their communities. So I want to say purpose being tied to impact is like one of the greatest things that be an outcome of this experience.
That's amazing. I mean, just to unpack that a little bit, this power of no really resonates with me in my experience because and I say this all the time, I feel like educators, because it's a calling, the work that they do, it's almost sort of, they come part and parcel with overfunctioning. They don't know how to say no, and they
Yeah.
also, they don't know how to say no for their own mental health and their own sanity, so you don't hear a lot when
Mm-hmm.
when budgets are cut in a district, budgets are cut in a school, and teachers are now expected to do even more than they were able to do before, than they were expected to do before. You never hear a peep because
Yeah.
it's all about the children. It's all about supporting learners. It's all about supporting students, and that calling, that purpose, sometimes I think sort of overshadows their ability to have a reckoning and say, this is all I can do right now, or this is all we can do. They just keep going and keep doing it and keep doing it until something
They burn
gives. They
out.
burn out. They burn out. So it sounds like that reckoning that you were able to come to has been, really, really important. Unfortunately, it took you kind of making the transition to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, a bunch of other health complications along the way. They like when things like that happen, you often stop and put life into perspective. Like, what is my purpose and how do I make the greatest impact? So, I definitely encourage all people to take the time to understand their bodies, to understand their minds, and to take that time for self care, because creating boundaries will allow you to be more productive, right? If
Mm-hmm.
you're just depleting your cup, you have nothing to pour into anyone else. But if you're pouring into yourself, then you can put your overflow into other people.
Yeah.
So just taking an opportunity to make sure that you learn not just yourself, but grow your skill set, learn professionally, learn how to increase, stay current on law, stay current on changes, stay current on what's happening in your community. Always do needs assessments and continuous improvement checks to really understand what it is that you need to do to create this culture of continuous improvement and become evolutionary in a sense, right? Like
Yeah.
we have to evolve with everything that's happening around us. And I think it's important for us to invest in ourselves so that we can then pour into others. Because if we just let everyone take, we're going to become nothing and stressed and wither away. But if we continue to grow and pour into ourselves, we'll be able to pour into others seamlessly.
Well, that is wonderful to hear. It's infectious too, to hear, and this attitude of constant reflection and iteration, particularly in the work that you do in professional development, seems to me like it's super super important because the reality is that not all professional development engagements I think are 100% sort of appreciated by teachers. Their time is at a premium. It's really really valuable, and I would say that folks who do the work that you do have to just be aware of that and ensure that the time that you're asking is for them to spend is well spent. And it sounds like your sort of ability to kind of reflect and to think about, okay, how can I continue to improve this and improve myself and put myself in the right state of mind to be able to support teachers, really really important. And I'm sure that is reflected in the quality of the work that you folks do, so it's really great to hear.
Of course, when you think about your work, Matt, right? When you're talking about EdTech sales and you're promoting how we support sales, those soft touches, those moments to go back and reflect, those engagement strategies, you have to think about that in professional development too. How long are you going to be able to keep the crowd's attention before they start to think that this is boring? So
Yeah.
maybe that slide doesn't need to be 15 sentences and you just put two major pictures on there and you speak to that, and then you're able to have some animations in there and then go back and rotate between activities, because that'll be the next thing that they're engaging in. But
Right.
you want to make sure that you're actually using these engagement strategies and research to keep them focused, keep them engaged, and If you're going to talk about using AI tools to support students, we have to start talking about AI tools to support professional development as well.
That's right. That's right. We should do another podcast, a part two, but you get to interview me because you are totally speaking my language. That is so great. That's awesome. Okay, one piece of advice I want to start to I want to be respectful of your time. Close out with this, but you have such a sort of wide and deep experience in this area and in the work that you do. I am sure that our listeners are really, really curious to understand your perspective on this. What's one piece of advice? What's one piece of advice that you would give to an educator who is just noodling on the idea of either making a transition or expanding the work that they're doing into into another chapter? I always say the same thing. We do not want teachers running for the exits. We need great teachers. We need to make sure that we're supporting our students, but it's not lost on me that some are some sort of thinking about their own careers and thinking about their own transitions. What is one piece of advice that you'd give to that person?
I would say write it down and make it plain. Whatever it is that you believe that you are called here to do, or you have a vision about, or an idea about, write it down so you can see it, put it on your fridge, make it visible so that it is a reminder that this is something you need to do, and that will spark and start to begin the little inklings about you taking that risk to actually see it through and make it happen. So write it down and make it plain.
That's a great, great piece of advice, and I think a great place to end it. Dr. Courtney Johnson, I so enjoyed speaking with you today. Thank you for being on the program.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate you. I enjoyed being here, and I'm going to take you up on that interview.
You better.